Sige. Shall we start? Let us put ourselves in the presence of the Lord. For the Catholics, make the sign of the cross. In the name of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Dear Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for ways in which you provide for us all. For your protection and love, thank you. Help us to focus our hearts and minds now on what we are about to learn. Inspire us by your Holy Spirit as we listen and write. Guide us by your eternal light as we discover more about the world around us. We ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay. So for those of you who just came in, kindly write down your names in the comment section. Salamat. Okay, so before we start off with our topic for the morning, these are just some, this is a reminder lang di ay isa naman din siya. So our final exam will be there will be a 24-hour window period. So that will be on December 17, 7:30 a.m. to December 18, 7:30 a.m. So similar lang gihapon, that's around 1 hour and 30 minutes or so. For the coverage, it's mostly after midterms topic. Wala pa na ako na-finalize ang inyong final sa nana ko draft pero wala pa na finalize. But since si personality is sa pre-midterm man ni siya, pero na kuan gihapon siya. It will partly be included, but it's really focused on social and abnormal. Um, the one on stress, kuan lang to siya, kining, that's just, kuan raman to, kining, it's a reliever for us. Maybe I can include it in the bonus part, but it's not a main coverage. But there will still be items coming from the midterm topics, especially DevSci. Um, but the general idea actually is that the topics that we have had scaffolds the next topic, meaning there is that idea that the basic understanding of one topic will be helpful for the understanding of the succeeding topic. So even if I would say na so and so ratong topic, pero we cannot really understand a lot of perhaps social and even abnormal psych if we do not understand dev psych, or we cannot fully get the idea of abnormal psych in the absence of personality. So later on, in the years to follow that you will be enrolled in sa majors, makita na nato, mas ma-realize na nato, mas ma-appreciate na nato. But for now, our reality is nata sa introduction to psychology. Okay, so abnormal man atong topic abnormal, dili kita ang abnormal. So our topic today is abnormal psychology. We hear this being said in jest. Kuan lang, especially nga kita mahilig kaayo ta mag-joke-joke mga Pinoys, no. So abnormal kay ka, or abnormal na siya uy. Unsa man na siya uy? Abnormal kaayo. So when we talk of being abnormal, um if we are being asked immediately, what made you say so? There are instances wherein we really cannot pinpoint or identify really the reasons what made you say that this certain behavior was abnormal or what. But so kana siya, unsa di ay na mga actions, unsa na siya mga behaviors that made us say these sentences na abnormal man na siya oy or abnormal kaayo siya. So um again, when we are asked about it, usahay, di gyud usahay, for the most part, it's hard for us to pinpoint of these things. So when we talk of abnormal behavior, these are some instances wherein we can say that the behavior or the action of a person is abnormal. So number one is deviation or something that deviates away from the statistical norm. So when we say statistical norm, um, there are already a number of studies, numerous studies from since time immemorial that would identify certain behavior as within a normal range. So, if we would say nga, ay basig di ay dili na mahitabo. If from statistics itself it would show that it is not within normal, then chances are medyo it's really beyond normal, 'di ba? Kaya kung if we were to analyze the term abnormal, so it is beyond. Ab is beyond. So abnormal behavior. Another way of identifying an abnormal behavior is it deviates away from social norm. So what is usually common in a certain setting, um, kung mo deviate away from that norm in that social setting, chances are that is considered not normal or beyond normal. So, kung pananglitan lugar na aka sa koan, na aka sa mall, especially karon Christmas, then pagkahuman medyo at least ang mga children under certain age level pwede na makaadto sa mall. And then all of a sudden, someone in the middle of the mall, you could just imagine siguro nga, in the middle of the mall, daghan tao, then pagkahumandan, kay natulog lang din ang tao, tunga-tunga. You would say, you can really say na, unsa man na siya, oy, abnormal man kaya na siya. Because it's not expected in that scenario that someone would sleep. Uh, Similarly, if someone would shout in the middle of in the middle of a mass or service, a religious service, someone would shout by himself or herself lang, then that could also connote as um, deviation from what is expected in that setting. A third A third way of identifying abnormal behavior is maladaptiveness of behavior. So, let's say for instance, when we say maladaptiveness, di ba, when we adapt, let's try to dissect the word. Mal is bad, adapt is to be able to adjust or get into that certain situation. So, if a person is not able to adjust to a certain situation, that can be considered an abnormal behavior. So, let's say, for instance, the person is eating, and then all of a sudden, or is hungry. Then all of a sudden, she or he realized na nahulog ang iyang one piece of candy nga kanang baratuhon ra gyud kay nga candy. And then the person cried. So much so na nagtantrum na ang person. So that can be considered as a maladaptive behavior, primarily because the person does not manifest a usual reaction to something not really very big na instance na yes, gutom na siya pero it's not a matter of life and death to the extent na the reaction of the person would be something that big. So again, maladaptiveness of behavior. And then this is the fourth one is very related to the third one, level of personal distress. So if a person, how distressing is it for a person to adapt to a situation that is something new to him or her? Or Given that challenges are always around, it's always a possibility that we need to adapt. That's number one. And then at the same time, there is an element of certain, to a degree, there is a personal distress whenever there are challenges or our comfort zones are being challenged. So how much of a personal distress is it for someone to face on a certain challenge? So muna siyang level of personal distress. And I think when you enrolled in psychology, this is among the things that you have this is among the forerunner topic sa psychology nga inyong gi-expect na si abnormal psych. Okay. Which is really typical, but yes, there's more to it than psychology, as you have seen. Okay, so if those were abnormal behavior, what then can be encompassed as normal? So these are some qualities that suggest emotional well-being. One is efficient perception of reality. So there, when we talk of perception of reality, as we have discussed in social psych, it's our realities are always constructed. So when we say constructed, maski unsa na ka-objective ang naa sa imong atubang, how you would take it in would really differ from person to person. So our perceptions of reality somehow may differ to a degree. However, um, even if there are personal differences in our perception of reality, however, again, there is always that clause or there is always a range wherein we can say that that perception of reality is efficient or insakto or tumpak nga perception. Okay? Let's say, for instance, there are some breeds of cat. There are some breeds of dogs that may look like cats. Example lang siya. So if kung if for instance from a distance or you haven't seen that kind of a dog, chances are you may say na it's a cat. However, because it's four-legged and probably hairy, um, dili ra kaayo siya layo. However, if a person would see a hairy cat, then pagkahuman mo ingon dayon siya nga it's a car, kay naagyapon siya four legs and whatever. So di na kaayo siya efficient na perception sa reality. So maka-question na dayon ka sa um, how the person would look into what is reality. Second quality that would say that suggests emotional well-being is ability to exercise voluntary control over behavior. So let's say, for instance, you got so angry, but because um, let's you wanted to shout back at the person, but because you know that it will not be healthy, so you were able to control your anger. So, kana siya, that's in the context of normality. It's not to say that people who at a very, very stressful situation, nakakuan yun kining, let's say, naka-hurt yun of someone. So, that may be bordering in on not normal. However, if the context really would see a person na murag super stressful na kaayo, makasabot ra gihapon ta. So maybe that's still within uh, normal. Then we have healthy and positive self-esteem. It's it's a reality that our self-esteem, there may be instances wherein dili kaayo ingana ka positive atong self-esteem, but there will also be instances na positive po siya. However, if a person constantly has a negative self-esteem or more often than not, negative ang iyang self-esteem, then that might not be a healthy well-being. And then the person is able to form affectionate relationships. So, um, mag-isolate siya kay di siya ganahan, siya ganahan makig-interact. Again, there are instances wherein we do not want to interact with other people. But if the person, for the most part, do not like to interact and share a part of his or her life, then that may be again a red flag. Sorry. And then we have productivity. If a person is able to, why are you? Sorry. Okay. Sheila, we have an in-house unseen friend here at the office. I'm at the office right now. We call her Sheila. I'm not touching anything sa keyboard pero gadagan-dagan ang screen. Sige. Wa ta mo gihadlok ha. Kay friend man na namo si Sheila. Sige. Let's continue. Productivity. Ano man eh. Abnormal yun. Pagmukha ni Huy. Okay, sige. Ang kulit. Kagot lang ha. I have to figure out why is this not. Ganahan yun siya. Sige, pasagda lang natin ato guys ha. Sige, productivity. Productivity is when you're still able to, even if you do not feel very good emotionally, but you are still able to eat at the very least, maski once a day lang, or you still are able to take a bath or brush your teeth and everything, or at least keep your personal hygiene, then you are still considered productive. Sige. Ambot nga nung gadagandagan yun siya. Let us continue. So, how when we talk of the delineating line between normal and abnormal behavior, the distinction between these two is often debatable, especially that certain culture will have certain things. So this is it may be different from society to society and even to individual. So let's say, for instance, if the person uh, does something, pero since he or she was a child, muna na iyang gabuhaton. So it's not really uh, an abnormal behavior to the extent na uh, expected man sa iya. And in terms of culture, in terms of society, there are so many things actually that may be considered normal for one culture or society, but may not be normal to another. I remembered before during college, we have a classmate who was a Rotary exchange student from Australia. Then, syempre, at that time, ang mga close kay ang close nimo kay akong mga close friends kay mga babae. Then pagkahuman kining the way we would exchange our behavior when you're already very close with each other, so munang usahay kay magbinirahay buhok or to express ay cute kay ka, so pwede ra siya matouchy-touchy, murag ang cheeks ana or di ba kaha nga kanang uy nice lagi ang imong kuan, nice ang imong um, fingernail nga color. So syempre makabtan mo ang kamot, ana-ana, etc., etc. And eventually, the Australian said na she really finds it weird that friends of the same sex would be very can be very physical to each other even if they are not lesbians or gays. So, matag okay. So kaysa ila kung mag-hold hands, let's say ang same sex, that's already connoted as an LGBT nga action. So matag okay. So lahi sa ila. So wide arrays of behaviors are often regarded as forming a spectrum that ranges from typical reactions to symptoms of diagnosable mental illnesses. So, because again, there's no one distinctive line between normal and abnormal behavior, um, there has to be a series or several checklist in terms of the behaviors before we really can say na typical reaction na ba na siya or is this a behavior that may manifest mental illness already. So again, if it goes along within a context, so that's still within typical reaction. If it is not unexpected in a culture, so medyo typical reaction lang gihapon siya. However, if it is already not in the context, not in the culture, even not in the context of normality of the person's behavior, then this may be symptoms of diagnosable mental illnesses. In order for psychiatrists primarily and clinical psychologists in terms of diagnosing or at least identifying behaviors, there is a manual called Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. So, kani siya nga manual, uh, this is a reference work consulted by psychiatrists, psychologists, and physicians in clinical practice, and other professionals in healthcare and social service fields. So, another term for this is DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorder. Pero typically, again, this is typically identified as DSM. DSM provides a classification of mental disorders, criteria set to guide the process of differential diagnosis, and numerical codes for each disorder to facilitate medical record keeping. So again, because this is primarily vis-a-vis in the practice of clinician physicians in clinical practice, right? So um, this will help guide the process of these diagnoses and numerical codes are being assigned for each disorder para mas efficient ang record keeping sa diagnosis and etc. etc. There are threefold purpose of DSM. One is to provide a helpful guide to clinical practice. So mura siya o again, this is a reference work that professionals would consult every now and then to help guide their practice. Kay, number one, it's so thick. Daghan kaayo, encompassing kaayo siya of different mental disorders. So, it is impossible to memorize everything. You may be a clinician, a practitioner may be able to have familiarity on where to find it, but it may be impossible to memorize everything. A second purpose is to facilitate research, excuse me, to facilitate research and improve communication among clinicians and researchers. So, at this point, later makita ninyo, pero at this point, the latest version for this is DSM-5. Kay kinahanglan yun siya. There are some instances wherein certain things will be discovered about a mental disorder na it may give certain ideas na okay, what we thought before was this is actually this. There will be later on makita na ninyo nga what I'm talking about na which is why it's important that continuous researches will be done. So DSM will help facilitate research and improve communication among clinicians and researchers para mas magkasinabot ang mga practitioners. And then number three is to serve as an educational tool for teaching psychopathology. So pathology is illness. So psycho is the psyche among psycho-emotional social na pathologies, psychopathology. Is it okay that you stay, Miss Guevara? It's okay lang ba ha kung you attend to your father ha? Sige, let us continue. As you can see here, there's a website. Klaro ko na siya pag upload na ako sa kuan. Pag-upload na ako ani. Ipa-klaro. Actually, this kani siya kani siya nga presentation, this was already uploaded. But there are some fonts na mas gidak-an lang nako. So, but the content is practically the same. Another thing about DSM is it has multiple axes or this is a multi-axial system which is designed to provide a more comprehensive picture of complex and concurrent mental disorders. So when we say access, we cannot just say na classifications of mental disorders only because there will be instances wherein behaviors will manifest more than several categories. So to do this, to better understand, instead of simply categorizing mental disorders, these mental disorders are being assigned into an axis. So what are these axes? As I mentioned earlier, the current edition is DSM-5, but what I'm going to discuss about sa mga access is using DSM-4 TR. Why did I do this? For one, there are several controversies initially when DSM-5 came about. There were so many changes from the past DSMs that there were several practitioners who had a hard time getting into. So to transition their understanding from DSM-4 to DSM-5, muna siyang si TR, taod-taod ni siya gigamit. Si DSM-4, TR, revised na siya. It has been there in order to cater to the transition towards DSM-5. So, but the axis actually is relatively stable in a sense that for several versions or editions of the DSM, these 5 axes has been used. So axis 1 is clinical disorders, which encompasses anxiety disorders, mood disorders, schizophrenia, and other psychotic disorders. So you would say nga, hala ka, moody ra ba ko usahay or usahay anxious kayo ko. So dili siya buot pasabot diretsyo nga naanak kay clinical disorder. Si clinical disorder, muni siya ang pinaka gyud sa among the axis. Kay When we say anxiety disorder, this is already to a really extreme na spectrum na sa anxiety. So to the extent that the person will not be able to function, uh, the person is no longer productive because of either anxiety disorder or mood disorder. So there are instances wherein mag-mood swings lang ka, especially for female during their monthly visits. There's a big chance that the female may have mood swings. But for mood disorder, which is under clinical disorder, no, fairly constant na siya. And then when we talk of schizophrenia, especially for schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders, these are already the big manifestation for this is the person already has no contact with reality whatsoever. So dili na masturya ang person or what. So there was this um mura siya kuan lang niya ang iya lang kuan is just the person's way of saying na nakatabang sa iya ang iyang guide dog, ang iyang service dog because the person has schizophrenia but the person is under medication, and then because the person is under medication, um somehow somehow gaka and along with therapy gakaarang-arang na ang iyang the degree of schizophrenia. So for the most part, the person is already in touch with reality. However, because there are still instances wherein um the for di pa niya ma-determine for what the triggers are, but there are instances wherein schizophrenic na nga mga symptoms would come in. So a big part of that would be the person would hear screaming and lahi na ang iyang makitaan. So there is already hallucinations on the part of the person. Um, Hallucinations and hearing things are already under psychosis. So a big part of schizophrenia is psychotic ng mga psychotic ng mga experiences. So anyway, going back to the person, one time she was feeling well. There was really not much na she could say nga uh, magka kuan siya, atakihon siya sa iyang schizophrenia o na magka-episode siya. However, the dog kept on bumping her sa iyang knees, which is their sign na she is about to go to an episode. So, medyo nakurat siya kay she's really feeling okay, but mo din to nga, the dog kept on bumping her knees. So, after several times, na nakuha na din, ni-manifest na dayon to ang episode niya nga. So, there was sharp shouting. She heard, quote and quote, she heard sharp shouting. She was already seeing things na ordinarily, if you are not familiar with it, you would really say that it is real because it's really, when they experience psychotic episodes, it's really very real for them. So it was a good thing na medyo she was still very aware na this is just a psychotic episode. And it's a very good thing that the dog rushed to get her medications. So she was able to take the medications, and the dog assisted her to lie down or at least in a position which is comfortable. So eventually, after several minutes, she was able to control her body shakings and everything. So the dog really helped her out. So Um, I'm not so sure if therapy dogs are already practiced here. Service dogs are already uh, present sa Pinas, but we can really say that it really helped in their therapy also. And then we have Axis 2, which is personality disorders and mental retardation, uh, which includes notations about problematic aspects of the person's personality that fall short of the criteria of a personality disorder. So again, um, under Axis 2 for DSM-4 TR, they cluster together ang personality disorders and mental retardation. So, when we say mental retardation, the person is really not, the person is still in touch with reality, but the person may be considered slow. But when we talk of personality disorders, this is more of in terms of the adaptation, how the person adapts to his or her environment and reality. If you have seen, if you have seen, and then I forgot the title of the movie. Anyway, I'll try to remember the title. I'll try to remember the title of the movie. Sorry. So, again, Axis 2, unlike, we have to remember na si Axis 1, the biggest telltale for this is there really is already uh, the person, whenever the episodes of these disorders would set in, the person is out of touch with reality. However, before sa una, when medications were really not very often used, um, the person can suffer with this being out of touch with reality 24/7. Which is why, sayang, pero I'll try to put a link, pero there was a an episode sa, I forgot, Funny Cara David, wherein a certain part in Visayas, for that small barangay, there were several cases of psychosis, and it was because the medical service is already very minimal sa ilang area. So how much more the mental health response in that area. So what the families were doing, which is not isolated actually in other parts of the country, is they chain the person and imprison the person in one area to avoid him or her hurting himself and other people. Um, so most of the um, they do not have much option in that scenario. Sorry. So the succeeding access rather, relatively the people, the patients under these access are still in touch with reality. Then we have Axis 3. For Axis 3, this is already the general medical conditions. This includes diseases or disorders that may be related to physiological to the mental disorder that are sufficiently severe enough to affect the patient's mood or functioning, or that influence the choice of medications for treating the mental disorder. If you can recall our topic in neurobiological basis of behavior, um, a big part of the injuries in the brain can be placed under here, general medical conditions, na because of perhaps accident, or there are physiological functioning that has affected their mental capacity or their mental functioning. So it has led to mental disorder. By the way, kuan lang siya ha, kining, we have to remember, unsay difference sa clinical psychologist o sa psychiatrist. Psychiatrists, they are medical doctors whose specialization is uh, in psychiatry. So, mga mental illnesses and mental disorders. Clinical psychologists, on the other hand, um, they are primarily psychologists, but in the absence of who are in clinical practice, but in the absence of a medical degree, cannot cannot diagnose, not really cannot diagnose, but uh, they cannot prescribe medications. So it's really just the psychiatrist who will prescribe medications. They may be able to have certain diagnosis, but they can only have therapy, behavioral therapy, or whatever therapy that can be done. So, if we can remember the lecture of Dr. Amon, katong sa brain scanning, if you can recall those TED Talks, Mia, um, one of the saddest things really is that in the practice of psychiatry, it's still not a common practice to look into brain scans. So, which is why, in terms of diagnosis and prescriptions, um, hit and miss pagihapon ang gakahitabo karon. Sige, let us continue. Axis 4 is psychosocial and environmental problems. This includes conditions or situations that influence the diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis of the patient's mental disorder. So, bale, with regards the patient's condition or situation, somehow the psychosocial environmental conditions are being taken on. So dili lang yun ang behavior ang tanawon, dili lang ang physiology ang tanawon, but the totality in terms of the social and the environmental conditions. So DSM-40 lists the following categories of problems: family problems, social environment problems, educational problems, occupational problems, housing problems, economic problems, problems with access to healthcare, problems with the legal system, and other problems like war, disasters, and even now, pandemic. So as you can see, maybe you have seen that in several movies already, that the person would take on sa, let's say there's a legal case, let's say nakahurt, uh, the person physically hurt someone or maybe even killed someone, pero ang defense dayon is nag-claim insanity. So there may be instances nga indeed uh, it was because of the duress the person felt or experienced rather in a certain situation. So mo na siyang apilo na siya sa mga conditions nga tan-awon. And then for Axis 5, this is already the global assessment of functioning. So under here, ga-rate ang general level of functioning sa patient. And this is intended to help the doctor to draw up treatment plan and evaluate treatment progress. And so the primary scale that's being used is the GAF, Global Assessment of Functioning. It tries to measure the level of functioning on a scale of 1 to 100. I'm not really very familiar about this, but yes. And then there are three other specialized global scales. When we talk of global, the assessment is not specified to certain behaviors lang or certain scenarios lang. When we say global, it's the totality. It's a total assessment. So other specialized global scales is social and occupational functioning assessment scale. So easily remembered, so fast. Then we have defensive functioning scale, and then again we have Denisha again, lahi Denisha. Global assessment of relational functioning. So this is in terms of measurement of maturity and stability of the relationships within a family or between a couple. So as you can see here, dili ni siya si axis 4, dili ni siya ma-isolate sa for any situation or context of a patient, di gyud ni siya ma-isolate, appeal gyud ni siya. So which is why gatan-awon gyud ang stability of the relationship of the client vis-a-vis his or her relationship sa family. So, nag-ingon ko kaganiha nga lisod kaayo kung mag-focus lang ta sa categories. But we still have to look into the categories because these categories would be saying a lot in terms of how, at least in terms of identifying certain behaviors which may fall under normalcy and beyond normal. So the first diagnostic categories is disorders usually first diagnosed in infancy, childhood, or adolescence, like for instance mental retardation and delays in the various aspects in which children are expected to develop. Um, one of the things that one of the things that will be a telltale sign if a person is has certain mental retardation is, let's say, naa siya'y igsuon, magulang. Then, pagkahuman dayon ana kay pagka-anak dayon sa second is na ma-compare man gyud siya. Unfortunately, ma-compare man gyud siya. How the first one uh, was how the first one was in terms of growing up, and then the second child, how that child is in growing up. So in that scenario, makita na dayon nga, ay, naay difference, especially for parents when they see kani siya sa infancy, childhood, and eventually sa adolescence. And then we have second category is delirium, dementia, amnestic, and other cognitive disorders. Uh, these are permanent or temporary impairment of the functioning of the brain as a result of aging, degenerative diseases of the nervous system, or ingestions of toxic substances. So you have to you have to look into the possible reasons for these cognitive disorders in terms of its happening. So, see, aging and degenerative diseases of the nervous system, this is relatively, it's not really everyone's part of the aging process, but it may happen as a person would age. However, ingestion of toxic substances like drugs, among other things, or even industrial chemicals na unfortunately, let's say, nag-leak or what, so naka-ingest or na-inhale, there's a possibility that this can happen. The third is mental disorders due to general medical conditions. So mental symptoms is assessed to be direct physiological consequence of a medical condition. So um, you can see here, sorry, you can see here na we are still in the third, no? Pero makita nato nga there is always the possibility that a certain patient will manifest more than one. So medyo magkuan siya kining ah not really overlap pero dili siya diretso ma-identify distinctable distinct di siya distinguish diretso okay so ba na so again the third one is mental disorders due to general medical condition and is assessed to be the direct physiological consequence of a medical condition. And then we have substance-related disorders. Karon, this is already identified as substance use disorder. This is excessive or habitual use of psychoactive substances that can alter behavior. And the side effects of prescribed medications or exposure to toxic substances. So, makaingon din kag unsay difference nila aning sa 2 o sa 4. Um, for the 2, for number 2, it is primarily sa cognitive disorders. Ang focus is on the cognitive disorders and not so much on where it's coming from. Or cognitive disorders due to this. Pero kaning si number 4, ka-focus gyud siya sa kani siya because of substance use. So um there are relaxants which are legally prescribed by doctors which are very much regulated. Okay, otherwise it can become addictive. So kung dili na siya ma-regulate, dako ang possibility that it will cause addiction, which eventually can alter behavior, etc., etc. Number 5, we have schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders. So, gross impairment of reality testing, marked disturbances of thought and perception, and bizarre behavior. So, if you can recall, si Axis 1, mo to siya ang tanawon. Kung automatic na gali nga there is already an impaired perception of reality, then chances are it will fall under this category. Diretso na dayon to siya tanawon sa Axis 1. So again, it is a classification of its own. So naanagid siya gross impairment of reality again and marked disturbances of thought and perception. So diretso na siya nga under this category. And then we have mood disorders. Again, normal na ni siya kung dili kaniha, dili kani siya. Mood swings can still be in the context of normal na instance. However, for mood disorders, medyo paano na siya. There are already certain disorders that are labeled under mood disorders. So, ano siya, under mood disorders. And then we have anxiety disorders. Feelings of anxiety may be the main symptom or play a crucial role in disorders of this nature. So, as mentioned earlier, sa katong when we were discussing about axis, under anxiety disorders, the feeling of anxiety is the main symptom, or it plays a crucial role in this disorder. So, kung grabe na kayo yung anxiety attack, dili na siya makakuan, or because of the anxiety, basig na siya, there is already a marked disturbance of thought. So that's another thing. And then we have somatoform disorders. The physical symptoms, these are physical symptoms with no biological basis. So kanang mga usahay ang mga allergies nato diha nga walay clear, that's the distinction lang ha. Walay clear nga basis. So there are no allergens present pero nagkuan gihapon ka, nagyapon kay reaction or kanang anxious na ka for the exam. Then pagpahuman dayon kay nag nag LBM ka. So kana siya, that is still in the context of being normal. Pero si somatoform disorder, again, magmanifest siya of physical symptoms with no biological basis. And then we have factitious disease. This is feigning or intentionally producing physical or psychological symptoms to appear sick without any apparent gain. So it can be one of the labels that's associated with factitious disorder is attention seeking. So, unsa man na siya, uy, KSP kaayo, gusto gyud nga kuan lang kining para murag gusto lang gyud siya para kuan kining victim mode lang din siya or kaluuyan. So mag-factitious disorder dayon siya. And then we have dissociative disorder. Um, Marked by temporary shifts in functions of consciousness, memory, identity, or perceptions of the environment due to emotional problems. This was formerly known as multiple personality disorder. So, um, there are several movies already. One is the Three Faces of Eve. And then, oh my gosh, I forgot katong isa sa pinakauna yun na recorded na dissociative disorder. A marker for dissociative disorder is the person will have fugues. Ano sa maning fugue? Kasi buot to sabot sa fugue. Okay, I think I can. Oh, okay. A fugue is Fugue. Uh, the idea of fugue is the person will forget what happened at a certain period. So let's say, for instance, ang iyang katapusan na remember kay ni pauli siya. Then the next thing the person would remember is naana siya somewhere and the person does not know how he or she was able to reach that certain destination or that place. So again, marked by temporary shifts in functions of consciousness, memory, identity, or perceptions of the environment due to emotional problems. So it's a way of it's a maladaptive way of the person uh, in terms of dealing with stress or emotional problem. But for the most part, because the person is already in too much um, stress, that the psyche of the person will create a certain identity who is able to quote unquote who is considered stronger than the real identity of the person. Um, a curious mark for dissociative disorder is the real identity of the person does not know the existence of the other identities, but the other identities know of the original identity. Exciting, no? So, wait up lang mo sa inyong outside na class para further discussions on this. And then we have sexual and gender identity disorders. Distress is caused by problems with sexual identity, sexual performance, or the direction of sexual arousal. So, um, ang ang kaning dili sabot pasabot nga kung LGBT ka abnormal na. No. Ang kani siya is the distresses experienced by people as caused by in this context. So, let's say for instance, especially kani siya, kaning direction of sexual arousal, the person will not be aroused, let's say, if plain lang na plain lang na act. Pero dapat na agyoy certain things. So, um, under here is the necrophilia, wherein there is an abnormal attachment or sexual arousal to dead people. So, mas ma-arouse sila sa mga dead. So, oops. Okay, so, kana siya. Again, kani siya nga disorder is because of sex and gender. And then we have eating disorders. This includes self-starvation and or binge eating, accompanied by inaccurate perception of one's body image. So if a person has anorexia, 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 the person will self-starve. And then the person would see himself or herself as very fat in spite of being um, being seen by people as already very thin or murag skeletal na gali hapit. Uh, Another type of eating disorder is bulimia, wherein because the person feels guilty because he or she is eating so much, so the person would force himself or herself to throw up kung unsa yung gikaon because the person does not want to gain weight. And then we have sleep disorders. Evidence, di siya ha, di ni siya events. Evidence in pervasive and extreme problems in sleep patterns. So, um, the sleep, the there are so many patterns or ways sa sleep disorder. It could be nga di gyud makatulog, so insomnia, or it could be nga makatulog pero easily disturbed ang iyang sleep. So, or nasa to the extent sa dayon kay to another extent sa dayon, extreme extent is nagkatuluga ra sad siya. So, unsa ni siya nga unsay rason kaha ani ng mga sleep disorders. And then we have impulse control disorder. This is an inability to control anger and the desire to steal, kleptomania, gamble, set fire, unsa gali ng tanang sa pyromania, or pull one's hair. Dekalomania yata to. Nakalimot na ko sa kaning pulling one's hair. So again, the person does not have or is not able to control the impulse to get angry, to steal, to gamble, to set fire, or to pull one's hair. So, di yun makapugong na birahon niya yung buhok or mag-arson or mag-gamble or to steal or to get angry. Nakabalo siya nga dili yung maayo pero easily angered yun siya. So, curiously enough, because this is impulse control already, so those who are addicted to gamble, under ni siya ani. So when we talk of addiction, it's not just the substance use. Kay there are people who will also be addicted to food, addicted to sex. So kuan na siya. Lain-lain sila nga categories, but it's still there's no control. Then we have adjustment disorders. This covers emotional and or behavioral difficulties due to identifiable stressors. So, especially now sa pandemic, Ang primary nga kuan niya is adjustment disorder natong tanan actually. Uh, Although some may be able to better adjust while others must na because for one reason or another nga mas mo complicate sa ilang situation, mas lisod mag-adjust. And then we have personality disorders, long-standing and rigid patterns of inner experience and maladaptive behavior that constitute immature and inappropriate ways of coping with stress and solving problems. So, si personality disorder, nga, di ni siya tungod kay one instance lang uh, na nahitabo din na siya. But this is again a long-standing and rigid patterns already, primarily because of inappropriate ways of coping with stress when they were younger and solving problems. So, let's say for instance, a person is a perennial liar. It could be because while growing up, the child whenever the child is in a situation, mahadlok siguro siya nga ma-punish or ang punishment siguro sa iya coming from adults is very rigid and very physical. So chances are the child would find ways to to get away from the situation or to get away from being punished. So the child may come up with certain excuses to avoid the physical punishment. And of course, ma-constitute as lying na siya. So, lying is not necessarily, it's still within the context of normal. Pero if a person is already a perennial liar, then it can be a part of that, or it's already a manifestation of number 16. And then the last one is other conditions that may be focus of clinical attention, problems and life events for which people may seek professional assistance. So, again, last slide naman siya. Okay. So, last slide na siya. So, again, dumdumon lang nato nga in order for us to have a better idea or at least to, to understand behaviors better in the context of abnormal psych, um, kung baga Bible nato si DSM. And then si DSM, a way of attacking, quote unquote, a way of looking into diagnosis, it tries to look into the five diagnostic axes. Si automatic na si basta ko nagali psychosis nagali separate yun na siya ang clinical disorders. But for other disorders like personality disorder, lahi sa na siya. And then we look into the general medical conditions, and then the psychosocial environmental problems, and how it is going to be assessed. Unsaon siya pag measure, unsaon siya pag look into. And then after the access, it is necessary to look into the diagnostic categories, how we are going to identify the symptoms so that we will be able to identify which category it may fall. Again, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of categories, pwede yun siya mag-overlap. But the idea is we look into the primary, and then kung tanawon lang dayon nato to kung unsa dayon to ang iyang mga um, factors that may mga secondary factors na dayon nga makita nato ani nga mga category. Sige, questions? Questions so far? Or at least gusto mag-share? The ones that I told you earlier katong about unsa to nga mga movies or unsa to nga katong unsa to nga mga situations about katong sa therapy dog, ako ra tong i-post sa ha sa e-learn because those are helpful those are learnings that will be useful along the way as we go about understanding abnormal behaviors. Naiisa ka video actually. It's also TED Talk. Pero dili na ta, ano mong good. Uh, it's 20 minutes so murag medyo lisod na kaayo siya kung paano na to karon. I will link that sa e-learn gihapon. Sige, questions. By the way, for those na medyo gakawala-wala, just make sure to write your name in the comment section ha for the attendance. Sige. Questions? Question. Yes, Remy, go ahead.
Oh, ma'am, good morning. So actually, ma'am, I really have a lot of question regarding
Morning.
abnormal psychology. It is because it is really a broad topic, ma'am, and there are a lot of theories regarding disorders, psychology disorders, ma'am. But based on the movies I've watched, ma'am, especially the new release in Netflix, ma'am, entitled Hype, about gina I forgot the name, ma'am, but mura bitog hypnotherapy, yeah, things like that, ma'am. I'm actually doing a research regarding it, ma'am, but I would also like to clarify it with you, ma'am, if hypnotherapy is really effective when you have general anxiety, depression, that it can actually cure it, ma'am, or not really cure it, but minimize the kinds of effect that you have bitaw, ma'am. Like, for example, when you have fear of spiders, due to that kind of therapy, ma'am, you can actually lessen being mahadluka na nga kind of thing, ma'am. And that would be all.
Thank you. Actually, no. One of the things that Gidayan kay, we see so many things, so many movies have been filmed showing abnormal behavior, etc., etc. Pero it's just that compared to other areas in medicine, um, si psychiatry and sa psych lang yun ang isa sa pinakalisod nga i-respond to because let's say unlike let's say kung moingon ka nga you have a cut, you have a wound, so you clean it first, then with antiseptic, then you place bandage, etc. Then if you have no other physical na mga illnesses, chances are it will heal in several days lang. Mahuma. But for psychiatry, um, as we have seen here sa diagnostic categories, there are several, and then it's always a possibility also na mag-overlap ang kaning nga mga symptoms na kaning mga uh, the person may manifest more than one category. So that in itself will complicate, kumbaga mas lisod siya i-respond to kay let's say hatagan siya og therapy for this one sa eating disorder niya. So this is the therapy that will be undergone by the patient. However, basig naapod sa other complicating na symptoms. Like for instance, other than eating disorder, di ay napaday siya lain nga manifestations. So, unsaon dayon siya pag married together or which category will be responded to first? Kay basig di ay dili siya pwede nga idungan o respond to, or it can also be a manifestation for something bigger nga kuan, something bigger nga disorder or complications nga na. So in terms of your question, if kuan ba gyud siya ma-cure ba gyud siya, unfortunately because of the so many factors that we will look into, there are instances rather na siguro the situation can get better for a number of patients, but there are situations, there are cases na because the symptoms are not easily, or the category is not easily diagnosable, mausad na dayon nga lisod siya i-reply to. Again, taking on what Dr. Amen mentioned sa kadtong brain scans, na kay again, unlike other medical fields wherein they have na actual proof kumbaga sa kung what ills. So kung broken bone, ang ortho nga doctor magpa-x-ray siya. So makita dayon siya nga okay, it's this kind of broken bone. So muning buhaton. Unfortunately for psychia, wala tay dili ingana ka-accessible ang pag-identify nato of what ails a person. So even if ang manifestation is this or that, pero dili siya diretso mo identify asa na siya gagikan. So at best, therapy can help alleviate and hopefully ma-manage well enough na the person can become productive again. But in terms of saying na totally healed, quote unquote, um, lisod kaayo na siya lisod kaayo na siya ipamulong. That's a very hard statement to say nga healed na gyud ko from that. Okay? Again, it can be managed. Uh, the symptoms may no longer be there, but like for instance, addiction. Kining let's say Alcoholics Anonymous. This is the therapy or at least a support group of alcoholics. One of the first things that they would say after introducing their name is the number of days they have been sober. So ang implication lang yun ana in identifying or recognizing the number of days that they are sober is that they were able to manage their the temptation perhaps, or the wanting to take in alcohol, but it's always there. The temptation will always be there. There is always the possibility that they would backslide. But di gyud na siya 100% mo ingon sila nga I'm healed from my alcoholism. So similar to uh, other kuan na ang therapy, it can help manage, it can help control, but we cannot really 100% say na it will really is it psychological. Oh, nag-philosophy na ko karon. Sorry, Remy. Did I answer your question or at least or gi-complicate na ako noon?
It
Rems?
actually answered a lot of questions in my mind, ma'am.
Ay,
Your answer,
salamat.
yes, ma'am. Nag-answer sa
Thank
tagan kay question mo. Yes, ma'am.
Lagi. Interesting mong good yun siya. Interesting kaayo siya. Thank you, Remy. Other questions? Yes, Princess.
Hello ma'am, good morning.
Princess.
Ano lang ma'am, just to, hello, can I be heard?
Morning.
Oh, yes po.
Yes, loud and clear.
Just to clarify lang ma'am ba, di ba you have said earlier nga insomnia is a sleeping disorder. And with that being said ma'am, will it be okay if we just tell to ourselves personally, like based on observation nga, I have insomnia, or di lang siguro insomnia ma'am in the context of depression, anxiety, like okay lang ba nga kami-kami lang, or do we need to get properly or proper kanang clinically diagnosis po? Or unsay difference if kami-kami lang if and if clinically diagnosed me?
I forgot to mention that earlier nga. One of the biggest temptations whenever abnormal behaviors are being discussed in Introduction to Psychology is our tendency to self-diagnose. So, isa yun na siya sa i-avoid yun na to. Kay, lisod kayo siya. Kay, like any other fields that would need diagnosis, it needs professional diagnosis. So as much as possible, uh, our observations will be kept in our discussions. But really it's if it's already diagnosing na kana dayong unsa man na siya uy kani siya nga babae kay schizophrenic gyud ni siya. So as much as possible dili gyud as we have to avoid that because we do not have the license, professional license to say so. Um, the reason why we are discussing is for us to have better understanding. So, kanisha ha, I do not have a license to practice counseling to be in clinical psychology because my area is in social psychology. So, as much as possible, I avoid diagnosing. There may be telltale signs I may observe some things, but I cannot open out loud say that this is my diagnosis because I am not in the position. So, i-avoid lang yun na nato dayon. So, kay kuan man gyud siya, kining it's also malpractice. It's in the context of malpractice if we diagnose. And another thing sa dayon is there has to be confidential for clinicians, there has to be confidentiality of the case of the person of the client or of the patient. So the patient should remain anonymous if and when let's say discuss ang certain case, the identity or identifying marks of the person should be kept confidential. But going back to your question na okay ra ba ing-ani magud siya. Kani silang mga categories at we have to remember na there has to be a certain assessment. So you or your friends may be manifesting either of this, but it could be still in the context of normal adjustment. Na experience nimo ni siya kay you are undergoing certain stress right now. So if, however, after the stress you have come across with is resolved, and then you realize na okay, nibalik naman akong pattern of sleeping. So makaingon ka nga okay, you have adjusted fair enough that even if you may have went through these certain sleep disorders, pero um, in totality, wala gyud kaayo ka na to this slide kaning global assessment of functioning. You would realize that it is already bordering in on clinical case na siya kung kato imong sleep pattern wala na gyud siya nabalik or mas ni worsen. Pero if it's in the context of adjustment and then the person is able to relatively adjust, dili ra gyud na siya worrisome, dili ra na siya problematic. Again, if it causes problem, muna dayon na siya nga possible na nga i-refer na sa clinician. But kung pananglitan again, kung kani siya, kung sa mood disorder nimo kay imong period. So normal, relatively in the context ra siya nga normal context ra siya, or ang inyong finals kay tanan inyong finals kay in one day, syempre ma-imagine nimo ang anxiety nimo no, pero naghilaka na ka, nisapot na ka, nagsingita na ka, pero you still attempted to study, you still attempted to perform and to function. So that is not worrisome. It's not problematic. Then, or somatoform, there are instances wherein um, nagka, say tawagan, hives, naka, unsa na, kaning, anyway, I forgot the term sa kanang sa Bisaya nga, mo break out na siya, kung, especially kung stress kayo ang tao. So, if however, wala yun siya really big problems that come along it, then dili gid siya clinical case. So again, pwede ra ni sila, pwede ra gyud ni sila kaning mga categories. Pwede ra gyud ni siya nga except for some ha kaning dissociative disorder kung mag-fugue na ang person, medyo clinical na gyud na siya. Pero there are some kaning mood, anxiety, somatoform to a degree si number 9 food si eating o si sleep siguro to a degree you may see certain changes pero unless it will really affect your functioning na part na yun siya sa imong daily life kana that's a cause for concern na gyud dayon. So again, as much as possible, in terms of diagnosis, we can discuss it with our friends siguro, pero to make it as the final kuan gyud nga, mugid na siya. No. Which is also why perhaps you may have seen some things, especially sa social media. It's so easy to diagnose people, but it's not the real diagnosis. So psych practitioners have been very careful in calling out this kuan siya nga mga practice. Dili siya maayo nga mga practice. So yes, hopefully did that answer your question, Princess?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Maybe one more. Kay I also have another class after this. One more na lang siguro kung naapay question. Another one. Ay, naulaw na noon sila. Bitaon. If you have other questions that may come up later on siguro, ikuan lang ko, i-message lang ko ha, sa either email or sa Facebook, sa Messenger. Or if ever murag medyo maulaw mo sa inyong question, ikuan lang ko, i-message lang ko. Okay? Sige. So, lahi ra gyud ning paspas og kuan ba? Lahi ra gyud ning paspas og internet. Sige. So, because this is our last day, nahuman ra gyapon ta no. I'll stop presenting first. Sige. So, can I see your beautiful faces, Adi? Sorry, I look like this because there are several people in the office. Nako sa office karon. Sige. So, again, thank you kaayo and I hope that our semester can somehow give justice to what psychology is as a koan, as a subject, okay? Sige. Okay, okay, wait. I don't know how to and there. Ikuan sa nako ha para mapicturan tamo. I want to wait ha. Kasud lang mga langga ha. I'm not lost. I haven't used I haven't used Google in an actual computer for a long time because you know naman my Okay, sige. For those of you who can open their cameras, kindly, nakuan kita tanan. Sige, sige, sige. Okay, ready? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Sabay na tatanan kay nakuan man. 1, 2, 3, smile. Ayan. I'll post this sa fan sa either. Thank you, Kayo, and I hope in your succeeding semesters, you will find beauty in our discipline. So again, welcome to Psych. Ingat! Adin ingat.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you, ma'am.
Bye, ma'am.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you, ma'am.
Bye, ma'am.
Thank you. Ingat, ingat, ingat.